In a decision that reverberated across global markets, the United States Supreme Court has delivered a historic ruling, closing the chapter on the Trump administration's controversial tariff era. The court struck down the president's unilateral authority to impose broad tariffs under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977. This judgment redefines presidential power and signals a monumental shift in American trade policy. For years, businesses and consumers navigated economic uncertainty shaped by tariffs, a signature tool of the former president's foreign policy. Today's ruling promises to reshape that landscape, reasserting congressional authority in trade and taxation. The decision addresses whether a president can use emergency powers to levy taxes on a massive scale, a power the Constitution grants to Congress. The verdict is expected to bring relief to industries squeezed by retaliatory tariffs and disrupted supply chains, and offers a potential reset for America's relationships with key allies. This is not merely the end of an era, it's the start of a new, potentially more stable chapter in global commerce. The tariff era began under President Trump, who made trade policy central to his America First agenda. His administration used tariffs, taxes on imports, to make foreign goods more expensive and boost domestic production, invoking emergency powers under IEEPA. Critics argued this stretched the law's intent, bypassing Congress's constitutional authority over trade. The tariffs targeted billions in goods, especially from China, but also hit allies, sparking retaliatory measures and global economic conflict. Legal challenges quickly followed, with businesses and states arguing the president had overstepped his authority. The core dispute: where does presidential emergency power end and Congress's authority begin? This period forced businesses to absorb costs, pass them to consumers, or relocate supply chains while farmers lost overseas markets. The stage was set for a Supreme Court showdown that would define presidential economic powers for generations. The Supreme Court's 6-3 decision was a masterclass in constitutional interpretation, focusing on the separation of powers. Chief Justice Roberts wrote that the power to levy tariffs, essentially taxes, rests with Congress, not the president. The court found that IEEPA allows targeted sanctions, but not broad-based tariffs, which are legislative acts. The Trump administration's use of IEEPA for sweeping tariffs was declared unconstitutional. The dissent argued for broad presidential authority in emergencies, but the majority insisted on clear congressional authorization for such economic actions. The immediate effect: IEEPA-based tariffs are void, and companies may reclaim billions paid. However, tariffs under other laws, like Section 232 for national security, remain in place. The era of broad, unilateral presidential tariffs is over, but targeted trade actions may continue. The Supreme Court's decision has sent shockwaves through American politics and the economy. It checks executive power and strengthens Congress's hand in trade, forcing future presidents to seek legislative approval for broad tariffs. The ruling is celebrated by lawmakers who argued Congress had abdicated its trade responsibilities. Economically, the removal of IEEPA-based tariffs should lower prices for consumer goods and reduce costs for import-dependent industries. Companies like automakers and tech firms will see production costs drop, boosting competitiveness. However, industries that benefited from tariffs, like steel, now face renewed foreign competition and potential job losses. Union leaders warn of challenges for workers in these sectors, creating a complex political dynamic. The tariff era fueled debates about globalization and American jobs. This ruling shifts the focus to Congress for future trade policy. Policymakers must now balance the benefits of lower prices with support for trade-impacted communities. The national conversation on protectionism versus free trade enters a new phase. The Supreme Court's ruling was met with relief across global markets as a more stable U.S. trade policy emerged. America's allies, long caught in tariff crossfire, welcomed the decision as a return to a rules-based order and a chance to resolve disputes through negotiation. For China, the ruling eases pressure but doesn't end strategic competition. Targeted sanctions and Section 232 tariffs remain tools for the U.S. developing nations. See new opportunities, regaining access to the American market and planning for the future with greater confidence. A textile manufacturer in Vietnam or a furniture maker in Mexico can now invest without fear of sudden tariffs. The decision is seen as a step away from trade war brinkmanship and toward international cooperation. It reinforces the role of the World Trade Organization and signals that U.S. checks and balances remain strong. Repairing trade relationships will take time, but the ruling provides a foundation for renewed trust. Predictability returns to global commerce, benefiting economies worldwide. For India, a key U.S. partner, the Supreme Court's decision is a welcome development. Indian exporters, especially in engineering, automotive, and agriculture, will find it easier to access the American market. However, tariffs under Section 232, citing national security, still affect Indian steel and aluminum exports. Indian officials worry the U.S. may rely more on these targeted tariffs, keeping some industries at risk. The Federation of Indian Export Organizations expressed optimism but urged caution, noting the persistent threat of sectoral tariffs. India will likely push for assurances against arbitrary use of Section 232 and seek a more stable trade framework. This is an opportunity for both nations to pursue a comprehensive bilateral trade agreement. The U.S. can engage India as a key partner in building resilient supply chains, especially as an alternative to China. The court's decision opens the door for deeper cooperation. Now it's up to leaders to walk through it. Trade experts agree the Supreme Court's decision marks a return to a more traditional, congressionally driven approach to trade. Dr. Jennifer Hillman of the Council on Foreign Relations calls it a restoration of constitutional order, forcing lawmakers to engage directly in globalization's trade-offs. Dr. Adam Posen notes the era of weaponizing tariffs on a whim is over, giving businesses more confidence, though broad free trade deals remain unlikely. The likely future cautious, sector-by-sector trade liberalization with a focus on national security and supply chain resilience. Legally, the ruling limits emergency powers. Professor Stephen Vladek says national emergency is no longer a blank check for presidential action. The decision's impact could extend to other policy areas, from immigration to public health. Some experts warn protectionist sentiment remains strong, and other trade-restricting tools are still available. Simon Lester of the Cato Institute says the fight for free trade isn't over. Attention will shift to mechanisms like Section 232 and Buy American rules. The political tensions that fueled the tariff era persist. The decision closes one chapter, but the story of American protectionism continues. Beyond tariffs, the Supreme Court's ruling reignites the debate over presidential power. It's a landmark in the ongoing struggle between executive and legislative branches, reaffirming checks and balances at the heart of U.S. democracy. The court's intervention underscores that even in national emergencies, the president's power is not absolute. The use of IEPA for broad economic policy tested constitutional limits. The majority opinion champions Congress as the people's voice in major policy decisions, especially taxation. The ruling sets a precedent for future legal battles over executive authority, from emergencies to military actions. It recalibrates the balance of power, sending a clear message that presidential authority has constitutional boundaries. The legacy of the tariff era may be its role in forcing a national re-examination of American democracy's core principles. The Supreme Court has closed the book on the tariff era, but a new chapter for America and the world is just beginning. This decision is an invitation to rebuild, mending relationships with allies, restoring predictability to markets, and crafting a fairer trading system. The immediate task for the U.S. is forging a bipartisan consensus on trade, with Congress now challenged to lead. Lawmakers must address unfair competition and job displacement without resorting to blunt tariffs. For the global community, it's a moment to reaffirm commitment to a rules-based order and constructive dialogue. Nations like India can now engage the U.S. on a more stable footing, free from the threat of arbitrary tariffs. The lesson: prosperity is not a zero-sum game. America's future lies in smart, cooperative global engagement. By embracing this path, the U.S. can heal economic wounds and lead the way to a more stable, connected future.